Hey y'all, welcome to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Samantha Leighanne and I talk about books. Continuing along with our best of, worst of, wrap up year-end videos, we're going to talk about the best horror and mystery thrillers that I have read this year. So these books are in no particular order. These are just some standouts that I read from the last year. As you all know, I really fell in love with the horror genre this year, and because of that I read some really good ones. I do not have any of the books with me because they're all downstairs. So we'll have some graphics on the screen for you, but let's just jump right into these books. The first one that I'm going to talk about, surprise, surprise, is Stephen King, and that is The Dead Zone, right? So this year I started working my way through his catalog in publication order. And most of his earlier books I had already read. However, The Dead Zone I did read for the first time. And I really loved it. I thought that it was absolutely excellent. Definitely we are starting to see connections within the wider Stephen King universe, but we are also starting to see him really like hit his stride in terms of character development, which is something I think up until that point he had kind of struggled with. I didn't really know what to expect going into that book because again, I hadn't read it before and it's not really a book that I hear a whole lot about, but it definitely became one of my favorites. I really enjoyed it, and it will also be getting its own video where I will talk about it more in depth in my King Chronicles series. So next one is in the thriller genre, and that is I'm Thinking of Anythings by Ian Reid. I think that it's really important for you to go into this book as blind as you possibly can. The only thing that I will say is this is about a girl who is on a road trip with her boyfriend. They're going to visit his family for like the holidays, and while they're on this trip, she's starting to think that she might want to end things with this boyfriend. This book was really dark, and I will say that the twist that kind of happens wasn't super surprising, but I absolutely loved the way that Ian Reid built suspense throughout the book. There was a scene that he wrote that gave me the heebie-jeebies, and I had to like make sure that all the curtains were drawn and like there was nobody looking into my house. Like, it gave me the heebie-jeebies for real. It is incredibly short and really easy to read, and it's, even though it was really short and easy to read, like it's a book that I've thought about so many times since I finished it. So I really loved it. Next book is The Outsider by Stephen King, and this goes more into like thriller territory. This was released this year, and I know that I said that I'm reading his books in publication order, but I just absolutely had to read this book when it came out. First of all, if you're unfamiliar, please, I would recommend reading the Bill Hodges trilogy before you read this one because there are spoilers for that series. However, I thought this book was excellently done. There were some really horrifying moments throughout the book, and there was this escalation scene that was just like absolutely horrifying. And I think the thing that made it feel even more horrifying is because I can see that happening in a situation today. So it felt very real to me. Definitely more on the supernatural side, but I don't think that that was a bad thing. And the way that it climaxed wasn't like his greatest work, but when you look at the book as a whole, I really did enjoy it, and I thought that it was one of the better books that he's written in recent years. Next on my list is The Ruins by Scott Smith, and y'all, I loved this book. I've never seen the movie. First of all, severe trigger for body horror. If you do not like body horror, don't read this book, because there were a couple of times where I like actually had to like stop and put it down because it got really intense. But the way that it was written was so good. Like, you had these characters that were written for you to hate, and it worked, let me tell you. But it really kind of breaks down what people turn into and the excuses that they make for themselves when they're put into survival situations, and I just really enjoyed that aspect of it. Not to mention, like, the whole concept in itself was really creative. I have been recommending this book to like anybody who will listen, like, since I finished it. Definitely cemented itself into one of my favorite horror books of all time. I wouldn't recommend it for a beginner in the horror genre. I think it's a little bit too intense for that, but if you are a seasoned horror reader and you haven't read this one yet, I highly recommend it. Next is a novella, and it's by Keelan Patrick Burke, and it is Sour Candy. Really short read. It's like 75 pages, but it's so damn creepy and so well written. You have a guy who goes to the Walmart and he's on the phone with his girlfriend and he sees this kid showing his ass, And he's like, oh, thank God we don't have kids, ha ha ha. Goes to leave the Walmart and back to his girlfriend and gets into an accident on the way home, and come to find out, oh wait, he's got a kid. Again, supremely creepy. Something that you can read in, 1 to 2 sittings. Now listen, I have never seen my dad pick up a book in my entire life, ever, for pleasure, all right, ever. But he said to me a couple of months ago, he's like, I think that I want to try and read a book. Okay, give me what you're thinking, and I can probably, rec you something. And he said, well, it needs to be short because, it's the first book that he's read for pleasure probably since he was in high school. He said, I think I want something in the horror genre. I was like, I got just the thing for you. And he actually really liked it and wants to read more. So I can thank you, Mr. Burke, for turning my father into a reader. So that's really awesome. Really well written, really creepy. And he's actually going to be publishing a prequel to Sour Candy. And I screeched whenever I saw, because I am here for it 100%. If you haven't heard of Keelan Patrick Burke or read any of his stuff, highly recommend it. Next book I'm going to talk about is The Troop by Nick Cutter. I have read several Nick Cutter, and I think this one is definitely my favorite. This is very much in the same vein as The Ruins in the type of body horror that it is, but it's about a Boy Scout troop that are doing this survival exercise on this little island, and this guy shows up and something isn't right with him, and things kind of go from there, and it's told in varying formats. So you go from what's going on the island to having lab reports or things from newspapers or police reports and things of that nature. And so you're kind of figuring out what's going on in varying formats. And so I thought that was really well done. Again, really suspenseful. You wanted to keep turning the pages. Again, with the body horror, it's pretty gross at points. So very much that same type of body horror as The Ruins, and I did have to point that one down a couple of times too. But it was really, really good overall, and I really enjoyed it. And the last book on this list is The Hunger by Amakatsu, and I actually did a full review for this one that I will go ahead and link up above. But this is a book that is about the Donner Party, and if you've ever read about the Donner Party, you know that that was horrifying in its own right, but we kind of kick it up a notch. It was really well written. It was really suspenseful. There's that historical fiction quality to it that was really good, and then that horrific quality to it. I was walking across a parking lot, my apartment complex parking lot actually, on my way home from work, and I had been reading the book earlier in the day, and I'm like, oh my God, I have to go inside right now. I need to run into my house. Very much a, oh my God, something's gonna get me, because I had read that book. I really, really enjoyed it. Again, if you want to see more of, can you actually not? Look, turkey legs. Look, it's the toe beans. It's the toe beans. Anyway, I really enjoyed it, and go watch my full review for my full thoughts on it. But I really, really enjoyed this book. So, and it combines two of my favorite genres, which is horror and historical fiction. So it was kind of a win-win. But
hi, hello, and welcome to End of the Day, Samantha. This is after I've worked all day and I've been editing a video. And the video that I've been editing is the video that you're watching. And as I'm going through and editing it, I realize that past Samantha is an asshole, because there's 5 books that I completely forgot to talk about. I'm not really 100% sure how I did that, but I did. So here we are. Past Samantha really isn't an asshole. I was just sick and unprepared. So books that I forgot to talk about. First thing, anything by Grady Hendrix, which I read Horror Store and My Best Friend's Exorcism this year. But I absolutely love Grady Hendrix as a writer. He has a really good understanding of balance. And by balance, I mean him as a horror writer. So he does a really good job of balancing those horror elements and then the comic relief piece of it. For example, in Horror Store, which is pretty much takes place in a knockoff IKEA, and things are getting destroyed. They're trying to figure out what it is. Well, it's a haunted IKEA, right? And so stuff starts to happen. Obviously, there's those horror elements, but then there's this satire piece to it, about just working retail. And as someone who works retail, there was a lot of that I could really appreciate. Parts that I found myself actually laughing out loud about, but then, you know, there were those horror elements that kind of, you know, helped remind you that this is a horror book. But I just thought that balance was really well done. Another one, My Best Friend's Exorcism, which I also really enjoyed, takes place in the 80s. It's exactly what it sounds like. You have two teenage girls. One of them comes from a very well-to-do family. The other one, not so much, but they're best friends. One of them becomes possessed by a demon, and this is the best friend who is going through and, you know, trying to, you know, help her become not possessed. But once again, there was the balance between the comedic and the horrific, and that book in particular was like an ode to 80s horror films, which I love, and so I really loved that piece of it. But it was a lot of fun. Highly recommend just him as a writer. And I even read his nonfiction this year, which also was included in my best of fiction and nonfiction. I'll link that up above up here if you're interested. But overall, just him as a writer, I really enjoy him. So Horror Store and My Best Friend's Exorcism, two really good books. Another actual series that I read this year is the Pines trilogy by Blake Crouch. Everyone had talked so much about Dark Matter, which is another thriller of his, but I ended up finding the first book in the Pines trilogy, which is just called Pines, on Audible, and it was actually made into a television series, which I have not watched. I watched the pilot, wasn't interested, but I, you know, was like, okay, well, this is short, so I'll go ahead and listen to it. And I absolutely loved this series, okay? So the narration was really good. It kept me engaged. Again, they're really short, they're really quick to get through, but I liked that about it. Brief synopsis is you have an FBI agent who is investigating the disappearance of a separate FBI agent in this like quaint little town, and he wakes up in a hospital bed, has no idea who he is or what he's doing or, you know, anything like that, and things kind of start to unravel from there, and you kind of start to learn what's going on. It's better to go into this as blind as possible, so I'm not going to talk anymore about plot, but the pacing was really good. I thought character development I thought was really good. I gave, I think, all of the books 4 stars, but I really enjoyed them. There is like, if you read Dark Matter and you liked it, then I would recommend this series. There is kind of like that scientific element, nothing near as in-depth as Dark Matter, but it did a good job with that science element without being too sciencey. And then once again, just like the suspenseful aspect of it. Like, I started out with just the first book in the series and ended the first book and was like, I immediately have to know what happens, and ended up purchasing the other 2 on Audible. Luckily they were fairly cheap, but like I just had to know what was gonna happen. And it's been a long time since I've had an actual series go through and grab me in that way, and so I really liked it. Really enjoyed the writing. If you like thrillers, if you read Dark Matter and really liked it and haven't picked this series up, then you really should. Another book that I read this year that I really enjoyed was Kill Creek by Scott Thomas, and this is actually a debut, which really excites me for anything that he puts out from here because I really enjoyed it. So Kill Creek basically is a story where we have a group of writers, and each of them are horror writers, and they write like in different subgenres. So you have your Stephen King, you have your James Patterson type. So, you know, each of them are, again, in like different categories, that kind of thing. But they are being brought together by this guy that does like viral internet shows, and he's like super obsessed with horror. And they're being brought to this house, Kill Creek, to do an interview. And, you know, they go in to do the interview and stuff happens. So if you read The Haunting of Hill House and really liked that, then I definitely think you need to read Kill Creek. There were definitely some plot elements to it that were predictable. Like you could definitely see what was happening. There's some very obvious foreshadowing, so just be aware of that going into it. Overall, when you look at the story as a whole and you look at the writing as a whole, I thought that it was really strong and it was really good. Yeah, there were elements of it that weren't the greatest, but I thought, again, when you looked at it as a whole, it was just really well done. It was really fun. Again, for a debut novel, excellent first novel, and I'm really looking forward to see whatever else Scott Thomas comes out with next. And the last book that I'm going to talk about is A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. This is a story about a family and their teenage daughter who is possessed, and basically they have a reality show made out of that, but while that is what's going on the surface, there are a lot more levels to it than that. One of the things that I loved about this book is the fact that the story is told from the perspective of the younger sister. And so we're getting a lot of that like familial interaction and that, you know, sibling interaction, and all of it felt so authentic to me. A lot of times in books that I've read, whenever you get that kind of interaction, it gets, and even the dialogue, it just gets to be like cheesy, and you know that you're reading a fictionalized family. And I just thought that the way that Paul Tremblay wrote about this family, I don't know, it just felt very real to me. And I think that the fact that it felt so real really helped me get into the story even more. I've seen reviews that have said that this book in particular felt like a knockoff of The Exorcist, and I personally don't think that that's what it felt like. There was a lot of elements in the book that you could directly compare to The Exorcist, but they directly address that in the book. They talk about the fact that it's a play-by-play of The Exorcist, because again, you're dealing with the possession of a teenage daughter and, you know, kind of whether or not she's faking it. And so that's why I think that it was so important for Tremblay to actually write that family unit as well as he did. I think that if he wasn't as successful there, then the book wouldn't have worked as well as a whole. But again, there's like those horror elements and the way that the family interacted. I just really loved it. And then the way that it ended shocked the shit out of me. I wasn't expecting it to go in the direction that it did, and it was one of those like, I need to think about this for a minute. And I've read reviews about Paul Tremblay in general that have said you can find out a lot about a person in the way that they react to his endings, because I did read Cabin at the End of the World as well, and while I did enjoy that, I definitely liked Head Full of Ghosts a lot more. So if you're gonna read one of the two, I personally would go with Head Full of Ghosts, but either book is really good, and I have a couple more books to read from Tremblay, and I'm really excited to pick those up because I'm really enjoying his writing as a whole. So those were the books that I forgot. So I'm going to go back to past Samantha, who's going to talk about some other stuff, I guess. I don't know. We'll see where this gets stuck in the video. Yes, so back to your regularly scheduled programming.
So, those were my favorite horror and or mystery thrillers that I read throughout the year. Have you read any of these books? If you had, comment down below and let me know what you thought of them. As always, keep it spoiler free for those who haven't read them yet. And if you want to engage in spoilery discussion, all of my social media links can be found in the down bar below. As always, if you guys like what you see and you want to see more, make sure you click thumbs up and hit subscribe if you have not already. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye.